Hello, I'm Angie Hoppe, claim attorney with Minnesota Lawyers Mutual. I'm here to speak with you today about the dangers of dabbling in the practice of law. You might wonder, what is dabbling? Well, a couple of common forms of dabbling include taking a case that's outside of your normal practice area or taking a case in a jurisdiction or court that you're unfamiliar with. You might wonder, what are the problems with this? Taking a case outside of your normal practice area can be dangerous because, while it may appear simple on the surface, there might be issues that an attorney who is familiar with that area would be able to spot right away. And however, those might be more difficult for you to see when you're looking at the case at first blush. Handling a case in a different jurisdiction also might cause issues because there may be local court rules with which you're unfamiliar with or deadlines and dates that are different than your normal practice area. So these are things to be mindful of when handling a case outside of your comfort zone, whether it's in the area of practice or in the court. So you wonder, why do attorneys dabble in areas or courts they're unfamiliar with? Well, primarily, one reason is that attorneys like to be helpful to people. They like to solve problems. And so when friends and family approach with cases they need assistance with, attorneys often want to be able to assist them. The problem is that sometimes we're not being helpful to our friends and family by taking cases in areas of law that we're not familiar with. The most beneficial thing to your friend or family member at that point would be to really ascertain whether you are the appropriate person to handle that case or if you should be referring it to an attorney who's more familiar with that area. Another reason that attorneys dabble is to make easy money. Now, as we know, there is no such thing as easy money. This is a very difficult economic time, and attorneys may take cases outside their typical comfort zone for the simple purpose of funding their practice. It's just very important to take a look at a case and wonder whether you are actually able to handle it before seeing dollar signs. There are a couple of ethical considerations when it comes to dabbling that are important to be mindful of. Rule 1.1 requires that a lawyer shall provide competent representation to their client. Now, we know that the attorney's license is one of general practice, and so whether you are competent to practice law or not, it's not really the issue. What we're focusing on is whether you are competent to handle that specific case. Now, just because you haven't had experience in that area of the law doesn't mean that you're not competent. It just means that you need to examine how much work you need to do to become competent in that area. So if you take a case in criminal law and that is not your area of practice, you just need to catch yourself up on that through CLE education or reading materials and research before you can handle the case. In comment 3 to the rule, there's also an emergency exception, but it's a very limited exception. So if a client comes to you with an emergency, you can step in and help whether or not you're familiar with that area, but for the very limited purpose of assisting in that emergency situation. You really need to look at the rule and also your comfort level before you do that. Rule 1.5, with regard to fees, is also important to examine. Rule 1.5a states that an attorney cannot collect an unreasonable fee or unreasonable amount for expenses. Basically, the consideration here is to understand that it's not acceptable to bill a client for your learning curve in a new area of the law. So you have to think what a typical attorney in that practice area would charge, and you can't go above and beyond that simply because you are not familiar with that area of the law. And some final takeaways here. If you have reservations about whether you're competent to take a case, just think twice. There's no simple cases, and if you're not familiar with a certain area of law, you might not be able to spot some very serious issues in a seemingly simple case. Finally, there's no such thing as easy money. We all know this, but it can be tempting. You just need to make sure that you are actually prepared to take a case. But if you do try a new area of practice, which many attorneys do, there are a couple things you need to do to prepare yourself. And the number one thing to do is to educate yourself, whether that is through CLEs, through your bar association, what have you. Just make sure that you have prepared yourself appropriately for that practice area. And another thing that you can do is to work with an attorney who is more experienced in that area of the law. If you find yourself in over your head in a case that is more complicated than you anticipated it to be, call your legal malpractice insurer first. There may be things that can be done to help repair a situation that you feel has gotten out of control. And if you have any questions about risk management issues, call them as well. Thank you.